I'm going to take a deep breath here, and we're going to begin to talk about tanking. This is one of those topics that gets people into their feelings, okay? Shams has a story that came out on Tuesday. He referenced it, I think, in a report last week about a discussion that is being had amongst NBA owners about potentially some new anti-tanking measures. There have been anti-tanking measures put in over the years. There was apparently a Board of Governors meeting, which Bontemps is out of sequence, right? That there shouldn't have been a Board of Governors meeting.
Yeah, I don't know if there was. I mean, they have calls periodically, so I would guess this was like a
it wasn't. They didn't get together. Yeah.
There's like 4 meetings a year. One in March or April at the end of the season. One in July, and then one in July in Summer League, and then one in the fall before the season starts. In New York, but they do have calls to like check in on stuff. So I'm sure this was one of those.
Okay. And so look, before we discuss this, I just want to say something. I don't care if you have I don't care if you've got a 9-point plan that looks beautiful in a PowerPoint. I don't care if you can prove that it is a panacea for everything. Before you suggest or you get behind any sort of anti-tanking stuff, you got to realize you've got to pass it through 23 owners. 23 teams have to agree with you. For a change at this material, you need that to happen. So if you have some situation where you're not going to get pretty much the entire league to say yes to, you're wasting your time, energy, and lawyers.
Which is why, for example, just to explain how this works, right? People have said for a long time, that there should be 1 to 30 for the playoffs. Just let's get rid of conferences. Let's just have it be, doesn't matter if you East or West, seed at 1 to 16. Top 16 teams make it, put them in order, figure it out, right? There's nobody, because it's so far recently has been historically imbalanced towards the West, nobody in the East is going to say, hey, I'm going to make my path harder. By the way, 5 years from now, perhaps there's a world where that flips around and it's way harder to get in the playoffs in the East. Well, then if you're in the West, you're not going to have teams go, oh, yeah, well, now we're just going to make it harder for us to get in. And that's just one example of this bigger thing where you need to have 3/4 of the teams agree on something.
It's not so much the quality of the idea. It's the, the ability to actually get it implemented. Okay, now that we have that as the top layer, now we can have a discussion about this because people are in their feelings. We have seen in the last couple of years, teams turn themselves into pretzels a little bit, primarily because of pick protections, where they've traded picks that are the top 4 protected or top 8 protected or top 10 protected. And we've seen teams do this. By the way, this is not new. When the Golden State Warriors were building their team out, 12, 14 years ago, they tanked at the end of a season to get the pick.
Harrison Barnes.
Harrison Barnes. Okay.
There's the infamous Mark Madsen game where he shot 7 million threes for the Wolves 20 years ago so they could keep a draft pick as another example.
Yeah. Right. But it's not new. The league has tried to do things to address it, the flattening of the lottery odds being probably the biggest change of late. And it's an issue now because of the gambling stuff, right? That's the primary reason that it's become such a front burner issue for the league. But just from the perspective of somebody who likes basketball, it should be an issue anyways, because March and April NBA basketball is a bad product because so many teams are trying to tank.
Okay, so 3 provisions that Shams says that they're discussing. We will talk about them now, keeping in mind that 23 would have to say yes. Okay, so the first thing that's under discussion, limiting pick protections to either top 4 or 14 and higher, which would, in theory, eliminate teams like the 76ers last year, losing 19 of their last 34 games to make sure that they kept their pick, which was top 8 protected, which they kept by the skin of their teeth. Top 6 protected, which they kept by the skin of their teeth and ended up being BJ Edgecombe, and those losses were absolutely smart under the circumstances. You can disagree about the strategy for the whole league, but their strategy that they employed produced them VJ Edgecombe, and was a bad piece of business for the Thunder, who would have gotten that pick if they did not tank.
Yeah, and the other famous one or infamous one in recent years is the Mavericks, when there was a top 10 protected pick owed the Knicks, and they punted on, it was a slim chance, but they punted on a slim chance to qualify for the play-in, sitting all their guys, including Luka and Kyrie, ended up keeping the pick by the skin of their teeth. It was top 10 protected. They got the 10th overall pick, traded back a couple picks, and ended up with Derek Lively II, who the very next year helped them go to the finals.
Right. And so this year, the team that people are watching, although, there could be more tanking situations later on, are the Jazz, who have a top 8 protected pick, also owed to the Thunder. And they've performed pretty well early in the season relative to expectations.
Too well.
And I would say that one of the things when you watch the Jazz, they are hard to beat in Salt Lake City. So, within 3 weeks of this season, I identified that this was going to be a problem spot because the Jazz are good enough, particularly at home. Now their schedule.
And some of these other teams have been bad. Like the Mavericks got off to a horrible start.
That's
the
right.
Clippers have been horrible. The Pelicans got off to a horrible start. So they have to not only are the Jazz winning some games you were surprised by, there's also been a lot more competition for spots in the top 10 than we necessarily would have anticipated 2 months ago.
Yeah. Okay, of these provisions, this is the one provision I actually think could pass. Because, if your team is top 4, it's a little bit different than if your team's trying to get inside top 10, inside top 8, inside top 6. This I actually could see happening. Of these, I don't know if you guys agree. I'm not sure how it would make a difference
because I certainly some of the most egregious tanking examples come when they're the mid lottery or late lottery protections, and this is the third straight year for the Jazz.
Also, if you're mid lottery, you're in a situation where you have the ability to win some games, but you are, probably maneuvering not to. Like if you are 8th or 10th, the possibility is you could make the play-in if so it's even a worse look. If you're a horrible team, okay, maybe you might do some stuff to make sure you're in the bottom 4, but you're not going to be, if you're aiming for if you're in the bottom 4, you're probably not a play-in team anyway. So I could see this happening. The second thing that Shams reports is that, and this one, Bontemps, I don't know how you feel about this. I think this is DOA in the cradle. Just this is my opinion without canvassing all 30 teams. No longer allowing teams to draft in the top 4 2 years in a row. I don't think there's any way 23. Now, again, you could give me your 10 reasons why it makes sense. I don't think there's any way 23 teams are saying yes to this.
I know one team that'll vote for it. I bet you the Spurs will vote for it after they got 1, 4, and 2 in the last 3 drafts. I bet you can get San Antonio's. Oh, yeah, nobody else can do this.
Yeah, I don't think that one is happening. And what I would say on the pick protection thing, while I agree that has been obviously a sore spot in these discussions, I would also say that there's a lot of times where being on the margins and negotiating on the margins has really worked out for teams. One example I'll bring up that Bobby Marks mentioned to me on the phone this afternoon that I had forgotten about was when the James Harden trade to the Clippers happened a couple of years ago. We did a pod, me, you, and Pelton, Brian. And on the pod, you talked about not liking the move the Thunder made. This is not exactly a pick protection deal, but just hold with me for a second, where they traded what was destined to be a late first-round pick for a pick swap. And you didn't like the move and the way they did the move for a variety of reasons. Set that aside. By them
I don't recall, Senator.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. You didn't like the move. By forcing themselves into the trade and getting a pick swap with the Clippers, they now have an unprotected Clippers pick swap in 2027, on top of having their pick this year. By the way, I think it's safe to assume the Thunder will be better than the Clippers next year. Now, that is not a pick protection thing. Obviously, it's a different thing. But if you're a good team or you are a smartly run team, particularly in this new system, winning on the margins like that is how you can continue to get yourself in prime positions to get better players, to improve your team, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know if we want to be removing tools from the toolbox for teams because of this other stuff that's gone on. The other thing I will say that we sort of have not talked about in this, right? The Sixers last year, let's say there was some liberal use of resting players down the stretch of the season, right? I would say there's been some liberal use of resting players at times in Utah over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And let's go to Cavs Corner for a second. Cavs Corner is very unhappy, I would say, Brian, you can disagree with me if you want, that the league has come down on the Cavs on multiple occasions for having players rest during the season and getting dinged for.
They've been fined twice for $350,000 total, I believe.
Right.
And they're resting guys for the benefit of trying to be as good as they can be this season.
Correct. They're trying to win games, right? So, let's just pull this back. Let's go back to the summer. Austin Ainge, who I've known a long time, think he's a bright guy, think he's going to do a great job in Utah. He comes in his introductory presser. First thing he says is, we're not doing any of this roster manipulation stuff anymore. We're full steam ahead. We're doing our thing. He trades all the older players.
Actions over words.
Well, the actions at the time were we're trading Colin Sexton, we're trading these veteran John Collins. We're trading these veteran players. We're going to play the young players, and we're going to be bad.
Right.
And we're going to keep the pick. Now we come into the season. Keontae George is taking a big step forward. Lauri Markkanen's still really good. Yusuf Nurkic has given him some minutes. They've got Kevin Love, playing, having some big games occasionally, right? All of a sudden, now the Jazz are in danger of losing this pick. And, there's some interesting stuff going on with the roster. If the NBA is going to look at the Cavs and the winning teams,
you got to look at the Jazz.
You got to look at the losing teams.
And the Jazz were fined last year for.
Well, I'm just saying, I feel like if that, I think, is as much of a fix for some of this stuff as anything. I don't know if you're going to be able to find teams 25 times, but look, I would say that, for example, the Sixers have gotten hit multiple times for fines for Joel Embiid, going from out to in or whatever for games, right? I'm not sure how many more times that's going to happen, because at some point the owners look at it and go, why am I spending $500,000 on injury reports? Right? I'm sure Dan Gilbert doesn't want to pay $500,000 for injury reports. And I don't think Ryan Smith would want to pay $500,000 in the future for injury reports. So that is another way to look at this stuff that, it goes beyond changing the rules. I don't know if you necessarily need to change the rules on some of this stuff.
I think discussion of rule change is merited, because I do think the tanking epidemic, honestly, I think it's the NBA's biggest problem. The not allowed in the top 4 consecutive years, to me, is an interesting idea. I would even say, how about a team's not allowed to have top 4 odds in consecutive years? Hey, if you're worst record in the league 2 straight years, the next year you've got the 5th best odds, and you're still, it plays out how it plays out. We see teams jump every year. Last year the Spurs didn't have the best odds. They jumped into the number 2 spot. Obviously, the Mavericks doing the same.
Would 23 teams say yes?
I don't know. I don't know. But that to me is a compromise that would increase the odds of 23 teams.
I think here's what I would say. Part of the reason we're in this new situation with this stuff is because of the flattening of the lottery odds. And it's created a lot more spots where you can jump up in the lottery. We've seen the Mavs, as part of the grand plan, jump up from 11. We saw the Hawks jump up from 10. We saw the Lakers jump up from 11. We've seen a lot more. Derrick Rose for the Bulls was the one time a team outside of the top 8 jumped up in 20 years, basically, right?
Yeah.
The last 5 or 6 years since this change, there have been all kinds of teams jumping up from the mid to late lottery into the top 3 or 4 over and over and over again. So that's part of it. To your point, MacMahon, hold on, just one thing. The rule change that I would like to see implemented, if you're going to talk about rule changes, so when we've talked about before, where you pick a point in the year when losses become wins, and then your teams are going to be incentivized to play players and to be competing till the end. Now, I'm sure there are some people who would say they should be doing that anyway, and why are they not doing that now? But the system is not incentivizing teams to do that when the best path to getting elite players, especially in small markets, is to get the highest draft pick you can. And if you turn that strategy into, for the final 2 months of the season, when, to your point, MacMahon, the product stinks and the most egregious part of this stuff is going on, and you have it affecting playoff races also, for example, because you have some teams that are just not trying to win. You have other teams, and they're playing teams that are trying to win as opposed to playoff teams playing each other, which is all random. And now it's, well, everybody has incentive to play from, whatever, the All-Star break on, or whatever time you set it. Yeah, you could maneuver that a little bit, but it's a lot harder to maneuver that than you come back from the All-Star game, like, say, Portland a couple of years ago, and you go 2-30 or whatever their record was, and they just plummet.
So I like that idea. And Wendy, the third thing Shams reported is a half measure of that. And not to go Breaking Bad, but don't do a half measure. They're saying basically, I think it's March 1st, they identify as the date to lock the lottery odds in. No, incentivize winning after that. Because you lock the lottery odds in and then it's just, you mail it in for the rest of the season. Incentivize winning for these franchises the rest of the way. The other thing, I think there's some other things that are worth discussing. How about just playing the lottery out? Because what you see is teams not just tanking to increase their odds, but they're tanking to make their floor as low as possible. In other words, there's a difference between having the worst record and the second worst record. The odds are the same, but the difference is your floor with the worst record is the 5th pick, not the 6th. So get rid of the floors, I think is something that's worth discussing. And then as far as things that would never be approved, I think if you're in the lottery, there should be like a lottery repeater tax or reverse repeater tax. At a certain point, you're not getting a full percentage of the revenue share.
That's an interesting concept. Here's all I'm going to say about any of these changes. And I get the merit of what you're saying, MacMahon, with all these things, right? However, let's look at Washington and Utah as 2 examples, or Brooklyn even, right? But Washington, Utah, I think especially. Yeah, these teams have been somewhere in the mid-lottery the last couple of years. Washington's been lower. They haven't had luck in the lottery, right? They've landed well,
5th.
Washington got the number 2 pick, but
they did get the number 2 pick once, right? But with these new rules especially, you can be in the middle or the top of the lottery year after year and still get the 5th pick, the 6th pick, the 7th pick over and over and over again. And yes, you could certainly turn those into great players, no question about that. But for as well-run an organization as the San Antonio Spurs are, getting the 1st, 2nd, and 4th pick in 3 straight lotteries put them in a position that no other team could realistically be in those same odds. And we wouldn't be talking about the Spurs in the same manner if they got the 6th, 7th, and 8th pick in those 3 years. We'd be talking about the Spurs mired in a rebuild, and where are they going from here, right? They might have 3 picks like Jeremy Sohan, who looks like a fairly washed out, for them at least, mid-lottery pick. I mean,
that's where the Jazz have been. They've whiffed on a lot of their, Keontae George is not even a lottery pick. He's been their best guy from these last few drafts. And
they drafted Cody Williams and Taylor Hendricks. Taylor Hendricks had the rough foot injury last year. He's trying to come back from that. Cody Williams has struggled so far. If my point is, if you say, okay, we're going to start, we're going to remove the floor for these bad teams. Well, if you have the worst or second worst record in the league, and you end up with the 9th and 10th pick 2 years in a row, if you're like Washington, you're already making a difficult path to try to rebuild under these new rules that much harder, and you're only compounding the problem of there's going to be bad teams, and now you're making it that much harder for bad teams to have any real path to get better.
Yeah, okay, so I don't know where this is going to land. My guess is there will be half measures. I will say this. The league did make a change last week to their rules, which was the injury reporting rules, in the wake of the FBI indictments, where teams have to be more aggressive in announcing day of game status changes, basically like update after shoot around. And it's already making a difference. And so there may be a half measure or two that may be in here that can make a difference. But the radical stuff, which is, in my mind, the idea that, most teams, if you go out there and look at the last 10 or 15 years, most teams have been in a situation where they've faced a rebuild. And they've faced, maybe they didn't get a top 4 pick 2 years, but that was something that they wish that they would have gotten. And those teams will remember where they were. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So I don't think a radical thing is going to work, but I do think you may see a tweak so that they can say that they did something.
I also just feel like a lot of this discussion ignores the fact that there has to be some path for bad teams to get good, and there has to be a plan, an ability for teams to rebuild, especially in small markets. And that, in all this discussion of tanking, and I'm not saying that like tanking is good, but that part of the reality of sports, that there are good teams and bad teams, I do think sometimes gets set to the side when we talk about this stuff. Like, there has to be some mechanism for a bad team to improve.
Regardless of how the folks who own teams acquired their wealth, the NBA is a very much of a socialism system. The richer teams pool money to send to the poorer teams, poorer in quotes, the poorer teams. The best players in the league take a cap on their salaries, in part to fund the middle to the bottom to get higher salaries, and the worst teams get taken care of. It's not a complete Darwinism situation here. The worst teams are given, unless they bumble it and trade it away, are given the opportunity to improve. That's the situation. And the reason is because there are 30 teams and they're all partners and they all have an equal vote. And they all vote to protect themselves, to protect their floors, in all honesty. And that is just a reality. You can come up with the greatest position in the world, but that is just a reality of the way that the thing is designed.